One common reason that people cite for exercise is to work on muscular hypertrophy or growing their muscles. And this also includes trying to maintain muscle mass during weight loss, which is another very common reason that people cite for wanting to exercise, aside from all of the health benefits. And it is important to note that there are health benefits that actually come from hypertrophy itself. A larger muscle is more insulin sensitive, and so it can help to prevent insulin resistance. And that's one of the reasons that exercise has such great protective benefits against something like diabetes. But let's just cut to the chase. And in this video, I am going to break down 3 relevant studies on muscular hypertrophy training and that answer 3 common questions. And then I'll just break it down very quickly at the end with some practical applications. This is sort of a longer video because I'm breaking down these studies. And so I have put my voice at 1.5 times speed because I have a fairly slow talking cadence. So just be prepared for that.
To answer this question, let's first start by looking at the number of days per week that you exercise. So with it established already that 1 day per week on a muscle group is inferior to training the muscle group 2 days per week, this study is going to look into the effects of training a muscle group 2 days per week on a 4-day split, or training a muscle group 3 days per week on a 6-day split, and its effect on the body composition and muscular strength, so body composition as determined by muscle hypertrophy. The study was carried out over a period of 6 weeks, with 4 weeks dedicated to the program, and 2 weeks were used for measurements and evaluations, and all of the sessions were supervised. Fat-free mass and body fat percentages were measured. The 4-day per week group performed 4 sessions divided into 2 programs, and the 6-day per week group performed the same exact number of exercises, but divided into 3 different programs, 6 days per week. So that is the important part of this study. The total volume over the course of the week was equated, and we're going to look at research that details volume specifically on its own. But this is looking at days per week as isolated from volume. So for all of the exercises in this case, the participants performed 4 sets with the load increasing and the number of repetitions simultaneously decreasing for each set. So they just used the pyramid method. Rest periods between sets lasted 1 to 2 minutes, and a 2 to 3 minute rest interval was given between each. The participants consisted of 10 male professional bodybuilders, and they were all elite competitors affiliated with the National Bodybuilding Federation. They were randomly assigned to one of the 2 groups, and there was maximal dynamic strength evaluated using the 1 rep max bench press, as well as measurements of body composition. And it was found that 4 and 6 weekly sessions, or 2 day per week and 3 day per week for a muscle group, promoted similar increases in fat-free mass and muscular strength in elite bodybuilders. And this is when volume is equated. So again, that's going to be an important variable. This comes down to the fact that the main advantage of more training frequency would simply be to include more volume, which we will see later is associated with greater levels of muscle building and fat-free mass gain. So we can look at this hypothetical graph to just sort of demonstrate this principle rather loosely. If we have something that are arbitrarily dubbed strength units on the left-hand side, and you look at what happens in the 2 day per week strength training, you'll see each one of these peaks is a training stimulus, and of course the immediate response to training is to get weaker, so that strength level dips, and then the supercompensation curve causes it to rise back to even higher levels. So if we do that twice per week with volume equated, the dip is going to be higher than that seen in the 3 day per week number, but the recovery in the 3 day per week session is quicker. So the dip is lower, the recovery is less extreme, but an extra stimulus is introduced, which levels out over the course of the week. Now, if we look at that in the 1 day per week strength training program, the dip is too extreme, because again, we're equating the volume, so it's such an extreme level of stress in 1 day that the body isn't able to fully recover properly to even reach a supercompensation pattern, which is really the main reason that it's hypothesized that 2 days per week are superior to 1 day per week, but 3 days per week are not superior to 2 days per week. It just has to do with the number of stimulus that are able to be introduced and where that curve shows some level of diminishing returns. Again, if you are equating the volume. So how much volume is optimal? If volume is defined as the total number of sets taken to or near failure. This study investigates just that question. The research consisted of 7 exercises per session, targeting all major muscle groups, including the barbell bench press, the military press, the lat pull down, row, back squat, leg press, and leg extension. The difference was the number of sets per exercise performed were changed. So the low volume group only performed 1 exercise or 1 set of each exercise per session. The moderate volume group performed 3 sets per exercise per session, and the high volume group performed 5 sets per exercise per session, which raised the total weekly amount of volume for each group to varying levels. It's worth noting that all exercises were taken near or to muscular failure. Muscle thickness was measured with ultrasound imaging, and muscle strength was measured using the barbell back squat and the bench press. Muscle endurance was measured using the barbell bench press at 50% of the 1 rep max as tested by the 1 rep max bench press. Subjects were 45 healthy male volunteers recruited from a university population. And there's a lot here in terms of results, but the long and short of it is that squat 1 rep max strength, bench 1 rep max strength, and bench endurance were not necessarily improved. They didn't have any significant correlation with higher levels of weekly volume. But muscular size, specifically the elbow flexor thickness and mid-thigh thickness, did have a significant correlation with weekly volume, with greater levels of thickness and greater levels of hypertrophy being seen in the groups with the higher levels of volume. So there was a strong bias from the moderate volume group to the low volume group, and then an even stronger bias from the high volume group to the moderate volume group. So this shows the strong correlation between weekly volume and muscle hypertrophy. And we'll discuss maybe some of the implications of this at the end. So the final question is probably going to be, how many reps should I do per set? And what we're going to see looking through the next study is that is probably the wrong question. And this is actually a meta-analysis of muscular adaptations to low and high load resistance training. This meta-analysis only included randomized controlled trials involving both low and high load training, and high load training was considered anything greater than or equal to 65% of the 1 rep max, and low load training was defined as anything greater than or less than or equal to 60% of the 1 rep max. So they also had to span at least 6 weeks, and there had to be direct measures of muscle strength and or hypertrophy as a primary outcome variable. And all of these exercises had to be carried out to momentary muscular failure, which has already been shown to be a prerequisite for a set-inducing adaptations. And the results of this study showed that while there was a trend toward greater strength gains and hypertrophy gains in the high load resistance training group, which was, again, anything greater than 65% of the 1 rep max, there was no significant correlation between the two. And there is a difference there just based on how powerful the statistics are. So that is an interesting finding, and we'll talk about what that might mean for how you want to structure your hypertrophy training. So what could all of this mean in terms of how you want to structure your hypertrophy training? Let's talk about the first 2 variables because they are very linked. So when we talk about the days per week that you want to train, we typically, you want to hit each muscle group 2 days per week. So that is what was done in the 4-day per week strength training group, but that could hypothetically be done if you were to do 2 total body workouts. But then you want to think about how total volume for each muscle group is factored. And that's where the days per week tie in and split apart. So 2 days per week are better than 1 day per week, and that's going to be true regardless. Once you have the 2 days per week per muscle group, the next consideration should be if you are able to get enough volume to maximize your hypertrophy gains. And what was seen was that the more volume that one had, and this was in the high volume group 30 to 45 total sets, 30 for the upper body, 45 for the lower body, because it's a more endurance-based muscle group, were seen to have the largest benefits, assuming all of those sets were taken to failure. And so, to or near failure, not to absolute failure, but you want to take them within 1 or 2 reps of failure. So the next tie-in there is with the training load. So you assume that you do enough days per week to get 30 to 45 working sets to or near failure per muscle group. The next thing that you want to look at is how many sets or how many reps you're going to do. That's how people often ask it. And what you really want to say is you want to do as many reps as will take you to or near failure with whatever weight that you're using. There probably is some weight that's too light. 60% of your 1 rep max to 40% of your 1 rep max would be considered pretty light, and you would probably be doing something like anywhere from 15 to 25 reps per set to get to failure when you're using those weights. Versus if you're using something around an 80% of your 1 rep max, that is going to get you in the range of anywhere from 6 to 10 reps, depending on how endurance biased you are. But that's going to be a lot easier to do. And I think the best advice here is simply to mix the loads that you use. So the typical wisdom holds true here, where you'll want to start, in general, exceptions always exist, with your heavier lifts. It probably is the middle ground where it's going to be the easiest, because you're not going to want to do 30 to 45 sets with 85 to 95% of your 1 rep max, because you're just going to beat your body down too much. That's something around a 3 to 5 rep max. And most of these studies stay away from those extreme ranges. And that's another important thing to note, is something greater than 65%, with that being characterized as the high load training, that's actually still considered rather low load for people who would be training for specifically strength reasons, which is why it may not have seen a significant correlation with strength. You would typically be training somewhere around 80 to 90%, 75% would be your low end if you're really trying to train specifically for strength. But we're assuming in this video that your main goal is muscular hypertrophy. And in there, it seems to me that the best consideration is to have a mixed load range and try to take all of those sets to failure. And the main benefit to the higher loads is simply that you're going to be able to get more done in less time. And also remember that it is saying that these go to failure, and that has to be done over time. So to create enough stimulus, that has to be done at every session. So that implies some level of progression. So even though it says it's a low load training, 50% of your 1 rep max, that should be getting heavier every week, or you should be doing more reps every week, because what is failure 1 week, if you've done it properly, will not be failure the next week. And what's your 1 rep max 1 week will not be your 1 rep max the next week. Obviously, as you get more advanced, these aren't going to change weekly, but over time, your 1 rep max is going to change. The reps that it takes to get to failure with a given weight are going to change. And so you want to make sure that you still have that progression system where you work on building up to more reps over time. So let's take the short, concise version of this. Make sure that you are doing your sets to or near failure with whatever load you're using. Mix the loads that you're using. Try to do sets that go to failure from 15 reps to sets that go to failure in 6 reps, and try to start with the heavier sets. Try to get 2 days per week per muscle group at least, and if you need more days per week per muscle group to get to 30 working sets for the upper body and 45 working sets for the lower body, try to add in those extra days. And that is the full breakdown on hypertrophy training, as far as we can tell based on the research. And all of those things tend to hold true when you look at what is done in strength training.